Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to get started with our Authenticator project. So we have this array where each element in the array is a hash. The hash has two elements in it, a username key with the value, and then the password key with the value associated with it. And you can see username and password are symbols and the values are strings. All right. So we have this part already built. Welcome to the Authenticator, and then 25 times print this. So let's run this to see how it looks. I have this in my playground RB, so I'm going to say Ruby playground RB. Welcome to the Authenticator. That's all it does so far. So the first thing to do in a project like this is come up with a plan of how you want to approach it. My plan is I want to get the input working. For example, prompting the user for username and password, and then getting the while loop working till the user presses N to exit the program. So let's do that first, and that will require us to work with a while loop. So this is how while loops work. You can say while true, so while a condition, perform some actions, and then end, okay? And this does not mean it's going to perform the action and go to the end and then be done with it. What this means is going to keep looping and keep performing this action while this condition remains true. Or you give it some kind of break condition within it, all right? So very important to know, while loop is going to keep looping till it hits a break condition or some kind of conclusion. So very important to come up with that end game for the loop if you're working with a while loop. For example, if I do puts, this will keep printing, and then run this. Check it out, keeps printing. I can hit Control-C to break my program, all right? So anytime you have a situation like this, just hit Control-C and it will break whatever infinite loop that you're stuck in. It interrupts the program. Anyway, so those are the dangers of while loop to keep in mind. So what I'm going to come up with are attempts. I'm going to have 4 attempts. So let's say attempts equals 1. I'm going to start it off at 1. And I'll say while attempts less than 4. Puts, this will keep printing. But notice how I'm not incrementing attempts anywhere. If I run this, it will still keep printing infinitely. So what I need to do is I need to say attempts plus equals 1. So during each loop, the number of attempts increases by 1. And then at one point, it'll get to 4. And then 4 is not less than 4. So it'll break out of the loop. So let's hope that happens. Let's run this. There you go. This time I ran it, printed it out 3 times. The 4th time it broke out of the loop. Perfect. Now the next thing is I need some kind of way of prompting the user to press N or some key to exit out of the loop. So let's build that. I'm going to say puts, this will keep printing. I'll remove this because I don't need this anymore. Say press N to quit or any other key to continue. Okay. And then I want to get the input. So input equals gets.chomp, and let's just downcase this also. So what I'm attempting to do here is get input from the user at each loop. And if that input happens to be this letter N, then it will quit the program. Otherwise, it's going to keep looping. Now, obviously, I haven't put in that condition yet, so it doesn't matter if I put in N or something, but it will at least prompt me for input. Okay, so even if I say N, it will just keep going. And then I can do this 3 times. On the 4th time it quits. All right, so now let's work with the input. I can do this. If input double equals N, then I want to break out of the loop. Right? I can say, whoops, I can say break. Okay? this happens. Okay, n, there you go, exits out. Now this is not the preferred way of writing this. Since this is a one-liner, remember, whenever you have one-line expressions like this in a block, think about if you can convert this to a one line. And we can easily do that. We can do it this way. We can say break if input equals n. Right? Looks nicer. So break if input equals n, then I don't need the end, I don't need anything else. And this should work. Okay, end to quit. There you go. Works. Perfect. So I have my break condition working if the user enters n, and I also have my attempts working. Now I have to deal with the user entering a username and password. So let's do that. I'm going to say print username, and I'm using print here because I want the user to enter this on the same line. And then username equals gets chomp. Then same thing, print password. Password equals gets chomp. Let's run this. Username, sure, password, okay. Press any key to continue. Username, John, password, Doe, press any key to, okay, if I hit N, perfect. All right, that's working. So now I have to come up with a way of comparing the username and password combination with a combination that exists here, if it exists. So at a very basic level, that will require us to loop through each element in our users array and then do a comparison. So let's build something here. Once we have the password, we want to do our authentication. Let's grab our users dot each do. Let's say, let me see. Okay, yeah, I have called it users. So users.each do user, here's my block, I'm beginning it. And if I'm beginning a block with a do keyword, I always like to put the end so I don't forget. So within our block, I want to compare the username that the user entered to this user's username. So the first time our username will be Masroor, password will be password1. So I will compare if this username that's been entered here matches that username, and if so, if the password matches that row's password. So I'll have both of those in this user object, since this one will house each element as I loop through it. So let's do that. Some kind of if condition. So if user, and then remember this is a symbol, so I have to use colon username. So if user username equals username, right? And this username is this one right here. And user password. So basically, if that password for that particular user is equal to this password that's been input by the user, then I want to simply put the user record. So I'll say puts user. Actually, not within quotes. All right. And then I need an else condition that I simply want to say puts credentials were not correct. So as I'm looping through, I'm comparing the username and password to the username and password that's been entered. And if it doesn't match, credentials were not correct. Now remember, at no point am I comparing this username, for example, with this password. When I do this comparison, I'm comparing each row to what's entered, not one item from this row and another item from another row, okay? Another hash. So, all right, let's run this, see if it works. Username, Masroor. Let's see, password 1. All right, it kind of worked because you see in the first attempt, it got my username, Masroor, and password, right? So it returned it. So the first one worked, but then credentials were not correct, not correct, not correct, not correct. So what happened here? Basically, it matched it to the first record. Once it matched it, it didn't stop executing this. It continued on in this do block, and it kept trying to match it to all other records as well. So for the rest of them, it matched the first one, so I got my put statement to work, but it didn't work for the rest of them, right? So I got the credentials were not correct. All right, let me exit out here. If this is found, I want to put the user, but I also want to break out of my do block. So I can say break, right? And this is not very pretty code, and you'll see how we're going to clean this up. But let's see if it does work. Okay, let's try Masroor and then password 1. There you go. This time it did work, right? It broke out of that loop, didn't continue on with it. Okay, so in web applications, this is going to be simulated by something like a redirect, meaning if it matched, it redirects you to the user's homepage or something else, some access area, all right? But here, we're just simulating that, so a break is working. So, not clean code. Let's clean this up. What exactly is it we're doing? It looks like we're authenticating users, and that's not specific just to this while loop, right? You may need to authenticate users for a lot of reasons. So that is logic that needs to be extracted away into a method. You don't want to leave logic like this in an execution flow. From here, all I want to do is call something like an authenticate user method. And that should do the handling of all this and will also eliminate the need for this break. To implement something like that, I'll need my method. So let's go ahead and write our method. I'll do it right here, right after my users array. Say define auth user, okay? So authenticate user. And what are the things that I'm going to need for this? I know that I'll need username because I need to compare username and then password. So these two I'll pass in from here based on what the user inputs. And then I'll also need my users array right here to compare it to. So I'll say list of users. Because those are the three things that I'm using in my block over here to accomplish this. So what I'll do is I will simply grab this block right here. This entire block, Command X this. And then over here, put this in here. Okay, and then I'll modify it as we go along. So what do we need to do here first? Every time I get the user to input username and password, I need to call my auth user method to see if those credentials were correct. So right here, I'll need to change this users because I'm no longer dealing with this users array directly, but I'm dealing with whatever is passed into my method as list of users. Therefore, I'm going to say list of users.each do user, and let's make this a little better. I'll call this user record. Okay. So list of users.each do user record, and here if user record username equals username, which I'm passing in as username, so that's okay. I could pass this as anything, right? I could pass this as name, but then I'll have to change this to name. And user record password equals password. There you go. Then I don't want to just put user, I want to return user. Okay? And if I return something, then it returns the user and it exits the method. I'm basically done with the method. So that eliminates the need for me to break out of anything. Okay? So when I call this method, I have to remember that I'm getting a user object back. I'm not necessarily printing anything from here. Okay? So else, I want to return a string. So I'm going to return credentials were not correct. And then I have the ends, right? So this is something important to remember. Whenever you return something from a method, you are exiting that method. So that's the logic behind methods here. So right here, what I'll do is I'll call my method, which is auth user. So auth user, and I have to send in the username from here. So username, password, and my user's array. Okay. The problem is, remember, auth user is returning something. So if I simply call it, I'm not really storing whatever I'm returning or whatever I'm getting in return. So what I'll do is I'll store it in an authentication variable. And you can name this whatever. And I want to simply put authentication right after it's done, right? So right after this method is done, I'm going to put authentication. So let's see how this works. All right, save that. Let's run it. Username, Masroor, password 1. Okay, we have a problem. It's saying block in auth user, undefined, local variable, or method user. All right, so I made a mistake somewhere. Let's see, what did I make a mistake in? Oh, whoops, here, return user. See, this is where Ruby error messages are so useful. You see, it even tells me it's in line 12, block user, and it's saying it couldn't find user. So if I go to line 12, see, return user, since I'm within the method, I'm no longer working with user. As you saw, I updated the name. So this is going to be user record. Okay, so let's try again. Masroor, password 1. Perfect. I got my user object back. All right, let's continue. Let's try a second one. Jack, password 2, I believe. Credentials were not correct. Let's see. But Jack has password 2. Why didn't it work? Let's take a look. All right, our program execution flow. Let's go back here and investigate. First time we went through, let's see, Masroor and then password 1. And it got it right. And then the second time it simply said credentials were not correct. Therefore, the second time it went back and it was looking at this program. Let's see. Okay, so the second time, this is what happened. If user record, username, and user record password. So it basically started looking at the array and it tried comparing Jack to this first record, and it didn't match. Because it's going to go through each one. It didn't match. So it went to the next one right away. So it went to the else clause. And instead of running through all of the users, it saw return. So it exited the method with credentials were not correct only after checking the first record. So that's not something we want. We want it to run through everything. So this is not the right place to have credentials were not correct. We only want to return credentials were not correct once the loop has completed. So basically it went through this block, it went through each record, and it couldn't find it. So this return of exiting the method didn't hit. Then we want credentials were not correct. So I'm going to copy this. Actually, I'll copy this line, Command X. I'll get rid of my else clause from here. So after this do block ends, then I will return credentials were not correct. Only then. But again, since this is the last executed line, I don't even need to have return over here. In Ruby, the last return is implied. So let's try this out. I'm going to go back here. Oh, I'm still within that program. That's not good. Okay, so and okay. Let's run it again. All right. Masroor, password 1. That's good. Okay, let's try a different one. Jack, password 2. Perfect. Now let's try an incorrect one. Let's say Heisenberg. And then wrong password. Credentials were not correct. Perfect. And that's it. Now, one thing is, in this particular attempt, you see that it didn't really tell me why it exited the program. So I want some kind of message to display to me if the number of attempts exceeded 3 or whatever the specified number is. So at the end of my execution flow, I'll simply say, puts, you have exceeded the number of attempts. And how will I know if this has been reached? Because see, my attempts variable, it's going to be 4 at this time when it exits out of this loop. So I'm going to say if attempts equals 4. All right. Now if I save this and I run it, wrong username, wrong password, go again, wrong password, go again, wrong username, wrong password. You have exceeded the number of attempts. Perfect. All right, so hope you enjoyed building that program. We've covered a very decent amount in this project. You've worked with arrays, hashes, while loop, and working through the entire execution flow, fixing errors that came up, extracting logic to a method. So that was a pretty comprehensive program. I hope you enjoyed it. Please take a look at it again if there are parts that confuse you, or, come up with a new feature that you'd like this program to do and see if you can add it. All right. And I'll see you in the next video.